Hey everybody, John Brown here with you again today, and I'm here with a quick review of Steamworks. So Steamworks is a game where players are competing to build the best machines. It's for 2 to 5 players, approximate time of 90 minutes to 2 hours. It features worker placement. It features, I guess you could call it tile placement, as you're building different machines that you or other players are going to be using throughout the game. And it's, I'd say, medium weight Euro game where there's and I'll get to this in the final thoughts, but a little bit of complexity initially learning it as to what all the different machines do, but the basics of the game are pretty simple. You pay to place a worker, or you pass with that worker and collect a little bit of income if you pass. You get points by basically building machines. Most of the components you put into a machine, there are power sources that you get through certain means, and then actual components of the machine. Most of those are worth 1 point, a few of them are worth more than that. You get points by generating points based on some of the things in the machine. That often involves trading in money or trading in components. And another neat touch, when other players use your machines, you actually get a point. We'll show you that on the board. That's also the mechanism that progresses the game into other stages and eventually ends the game. So let's take a look at the game real quick. If you want this is going to be a quick overview of the rules. If you want a more thorough look at the game, Rahdo's done a run-through of this over at Rahdo Runs Through, and Grey Elephant Gaming also did a full playthrough, 2 players of this game. There's a slight difference to the 2-player game. Instead of getting these little stopwatches that act as a, sorry about the sun there, act as a point when somebody else uses one of your machines, you get a coin. Let's take a look at how you start and how you play, and I'll come back with my final thoughts. Now, everyone's going to start with a player board. Now, there are 2 sides to the player board, side A and side B. Now, side A, in general, has some slightly different stuff you get in the setup, but in general, the same thing where your workers cost the same amount, and the abilities you have on your player board are the same for each of their players. So, this is a little bit more basic version of the game, and allows it to be... the sides are meant to be balanced, from what I understand, but just a little bit easier to start. In general, though, if you want to learn the game, side A is not a bad idea, but side B is much more interesting because this differentiates each player and gives them different special abilities. So, for example, I have a player board set up here for the green player because green is the best player color, so let's slide that down into the light here. And to start the game, I'm going to start with the resources that I have here, like I said. I'm going to start with 2 of my workers. You notice how this is coded blue. If we look at the player board, there are going to be several ages to the game. There's going to be blue, gray, and then red for ages 1, 2, and 3. There are also some starter tiles that are going to come out at the start of every game that are green-backed, so that we're going to start with the same tiles available in order to get. But as the game progresses in the second age, you're going to unlock another worker, and then another worker in the third age. So a bit like Lords of Waterdeep or other games where you get more workers as the game goes. We also have an automaton on the player board. So all the other players' pieces will be on the player board waiting to be used. And automatons are something that we get. Some of the building activations, well, some of the activations, basically the machines we get, allow us to get our automaton, which gives us an extra worker. Now, placing a worker to get an automaton might not seem worth it, but as the game goes, we're going to get bigger and bigger machines to get more and more activations. So I'll show you how that works here in a second. Or maybe by placing a guy on a machine, I'll get another worker who doesn't cost me anything, and then I'll also get other benefits depending on how many things are connected to that power source. So whenever we take a turn, so we'll go through in rounds until everyone is done using all of their workers, and each turn during a round you basically pay a worker. In general, your first worker is going to be free. There may be some exceptions on some of the player boards, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. And then we will place that worker either onto our player board or onto one of our own machines or someone else's machines. So basically, after you've built a machine, and let's make a real simple machine right here. Let's make a money-making machine. So here, if at some point during the game I have a clockwork source and then this monetizer, and I take an action in order to build a machine, I'll basically, let's say I'm able to build a 2-piece machine. I can place a worker on this, and you notice how the gears line up with the gears here. Now, many of the pieces in the game can only take 1 power source. There's clockwork, steam, and electric. Some of them can take more than 1, some of them can even convert power to other types of power. And basically by doing this, I would activate this power source and then generate 3 money. If later in the game I was able to upgrade this machine, which is another action you might take, maybe I'm going to end up with another power source on it, and then maybe this. Now, there are two spaces that I would be able to go to in order to activate this machine. If a worker comes to this space, they'll just get 3 money. But if they come to this space, they'll be able to get 3 money and activate this, which will basically allow them to get another tile. Now, this is one that can take several different types of power. It can take steam, it can take gears, and electric. We see this little plug here. And this machine varies what you get depending on how you power it. So you see if I power it with the gears, I can take a tile from age 1. So eventually we'll have, later in the game, all of the ages unlocked. So here's an example of something that, does different things depending on how it's powered. So another thing that I can do is go on my player board. So if I go there, I'll do whatever the activation is. Now this one, I'd have to look real quick, but I believe lets me get something and then build a 2-piece machine. But there are all different activations you can get. Now they're the same on the side A, but the side B is very different. For example, this guy, if we read his text here, it's a pencilgraph automaton toaster, of course. I'm thinking of adding a trouser press. His big thing is he's really good at making bigger and bigger machines that do lots of crazy things. So he has this basically upgrade action that allows him to upgrade any size machine in the game. A lot of the times, you can only upgrade to a specific size. So for example, this upgrader here allows us, let me get the focus here. So if we power it with gear, it allows us to upgrade a size 2 machine to a size 3, steam size 3 to size 4, and electric size 4 to size 5. So with this base upgrade action that he has here on his player board, though, he can upgrade any machine, which allows him to make some pretty crazy big machines. Now, something else you can do on your turn is pass. So especially later on in the game, we're not going to necessarily always have money for our guys. So let's say we're in a later round and we've spent none to place our first worker, 1 to place our second worker, and maybe we're totally out of money. So if we ever pass with a worker, we get whatever the value is below it. So I'd get 2 money for this worker here, or 3 money for this worker here. And we'll go through until everyone is activated. It may not be exactly even because of automatons or different things that go on, but we'll play through the round. Now, like I said, if you ever go to someone else's machine, so if somebody else were to activate a space on my machine, I would get one of these tokens. And we see on the board here that based on the number of players, there are different numbers of these clockwork tokens that you put out. And whenever someone goes to one of your machines, you will get this token, which will give you a point at the end of the game. And then when all of them are gone, at the end of that round, not immediately, we will then fill in the H2, we will then fill in the H3, and then there's a timer for the end of the game. Now, in general, the rules for building machines are that you have to have a source connected to a component, basically, in order to power it. You can't have a component connected to another component unless there's also a source connecting it. Now, one of the interesting things, so let's look at a more complicated late-game machine. So this machine has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pieces to it. So that might be really hard to get without upgraders, and there are expander things in the game also that let you simply, upgrade a piece. So for example, if I were to activate this machine here, this is an electro clock source. So you notice it has gears and electricity. So when I activate this thing, I can get 3 components. Because they're both clockwork and electric going into it, I can choose which one that I want to get 3 of. I can then convert I can activate these in any order. So I could then convert either 1 component into 1 point or 3 components into 2. I can also convert money into points, 1 to 1 or 3 to 2. Now this is a power converter here, which then takes this power and then changes into anything else. So you notice how this is electro clock. So I could also, now I don't have it here, but let's say I could have a steam source here, because this converts one type of power into all types of power. And then this makes me 3 money. Here's an iterator attached to this, which it can do because the iterator can take all 3 types. And the iterator basically activates this again to give me 6 money. So I'd easily be able to activate this machine and this machine. Now this would be a really complicated machine to build, it would be difficult to do, and it would be definitely a late game machine. But this is an example of like a really powerful machine that people would obviously want to use. And again, when someone else uses your machine, you get a point. So even if you don't get to it, you get a point, and in general you're going to have something on your player board that allows you to activate one of your own machines. Now to get into the pros and cons of the game, I'm actually going to compare this a little bit to Hyperborea in that this is another game where initially there's going to be a pretty big learning curve. There are a lot of different components in the game. Now the rulebook does give you explanations for them, There is one that's missing. However, if you go to Board Game Geek, the designer, again, something I appreciate, is on Board Game Geek. It says it's the mistake, here's how it works. And I believe also had a printout of a more detailed explanation of everything, in case you're looking for that. So pretty good explanations, but while you're playing initially, especially the first time, you're going to have to explain what all these components do, maybe look them up as they come out. Some of them are real simple and self-explanatory. Some of them, you might need to look at and make sure all the players know what they do. Then all of the other players are going to have to keep track of what everyone's machines do. So one thing, and another possible negative, is that, so this was a really big, complicated machine that I built, but each player is going to have several machines they build throughout the game. So while the main board isn't all that big, between the player boards and each player having their own machines and then components to build machines with to keep track of is going to take up a pretty big space. Also, a turn is pretty simple in this game. You either activate a worker and put it on a machine or your player board, or pass and collect money. However, keeping track of what everyone else's machines do, trying to time out what you want to do when, while an individual turn is really simple, players can maybe take a little while to figure out, what do I want to do, what order do I want to do it in, wait, what does that machine that you have do? So there's definitely a lot to think about, especially as you're first learning the game. But once you get over that initial learning curve, and if players aren't really... But once you get over that initial learning curve and players, kind of know what the pieces do, and it really isn't that difficult to take an individual turn, and things can go by pretty smoothly as long as players aren't taking too long to plan out their turns. I've only played this with 3 players. I've had a couple opportunities to do that. I can see the game maybe getting even more complicated with 4 and 5 players. I don't really have an opinion on that yet, having not done yet, but I'd check out the forums or whatever to see what people think about that. But overall, let's get into some of the positives. So there is a lot of cool stuff that you can do, and you can make some pretty sweet machines. There are going to be turns and rounds that may not be able to do as much, but there's all kinds of stuff. So there's Chrome. So normally at the end of the game, each machine component is worth 1 point, but this one's just worth 2 points. That's all it does, just adding Chrome to the machine. But there's all different kinds of crazy stuff and combos that you can do. In general, things get more powerful and more point scoring generating towards the end of the game. But the different things you can do with power converters and iterators, it's really a lot of fun. And as long as you don't get too bogged down in what all the components do as they come out, and what each other's players can do, and trying to always plan out the most optimal thing with all. You might have a total of 5 placements in a round. As long as you don't get too bogged down in that, this game has a lot of fun to be had. And I like that each player has their own thing, especially if you play on the B side. I believe there's 8 different players that you can play as, so there's 6 here, and then 2 here, yeah. And they all, on their B sides, play entirely differently. So this player here, if you play as this character, they pay their workers with electric sources. So obviously for you, electric sources are going to be a lot more important. You're going to want to find ways to generate that. And you're not really worried about money at all. So there are players that do all different kinds of things. You get different starting components. We already talked about this player. So there's a player who starts with his automaton, which is super powerful, but he can only place it on his player board. And, in general, the things are pretty expensive. See, 3 and 4 costs as opposed to 2 and 3, as opposed to 2 and 3. So all of the characters end up playing pretty differently, and that's a huge plus. While the game is probably a little bit easier to learn, using the A sides, maybe your first game, I definitely suggest using the other side after that. So that's Steamworks. Kind of a high initial learning curve. Players can maybe get bogged down with it. But overall, there's a lot of satisfaction to putting together neat machines and building a nice machine that other players want to go to. You still have that ability to activate your own machine on your player board, which I love. And I love the different player powers. So it's a game that I can highly recommend, and when I do my update of my top 10 games of the year, this game may just make it on there. I need to play it more to be sure, but overall, if you can get past the initial learning curve, it plays pretty smooth, and if you don't get too bogged down in what you can do, it's a pretty fun game. So that's Steamworks, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Alright, bye!